This is DevOps in Agile Way podcast.
Hello everyone. Today we continue our journey from last week where we started to discuss what is columns, and today we will deep dive into C, the culture, the first element of the 5 principles behind columns. And I will do some scrolling, some searching through the internet during this episode, but honestly speaking, this is a very big topic, and 10, 15 or 20 minutes is definitely not enough to discuss everything around the culture. Very often, if we think about DevOps, we think about DevOps engineer, which honestly speaking doesn't exist, and we'll talk about this after we finish with columns. We see the technological aspects only, and the goal which we have in mind is let me tell this. When we think about DevOps in the flat way, let's say very limited way, like a one-dimensional way, we create another silo. I mentioned this in the last episode. And the point is not to do that. We can argue that from the beginning of DevOps, when DevOps was invented, let's say, in 2009, was there anything about culture, things like that? We can argue about this. But this is not the point. The point now is that we have these columns, and DevOps is definitely much more than just take the code and deliver quickly to the environments. The problem with culture is that you cannot implement culture. You cannot force culture. We can see very often that some companies, many companies today, but some companies can have like their values, 1, 2, 5, 10, doesn't matter. But really what you see, they do not follow it. This is also the cultural aspect. So culture in DevOps is critical, I would say, to have a success of DevOps. Why? Well, this is quite simple. And why this is simple? Because culture here is needed as an enabler of change. So DevOps is something next to Agile, okay? Those two things are very much interconnected. They touch similar areas in the companies, but I believe that DevOps has like a better encapsulation here. So it takes the whole process approach, the whole definition, how things works. We have different approaches to teams, etc., etc., etc. Those are elements of DevOps, really. And of course, in Agile, we can have them as well. But they were firstly incorporated, in my opinion, into DevOps. As I said, culture cannot be implemented. How to measure culture? We will talk about this. The point for measurements of culture is that how you will know if you are successful or not. But what is this culture? Some will say that in very simplistic way, it's a culture of shared responsibility. What it means? Well, shared responsibility very often means that no one is responsible. If something is shared, it belongs to no one. I'm sorry to say that, but I saw this too many times. And when we look, for example, on the Atlassian side, they say that culture in columns, in DevOps, is not that the DevOps is not just a process. This is what I said on the beginning. This is change, not only change in the way how we do our development, but also how we collaborate, how we spread knowledge, how we grow as a team, as a company. Because here it is very important. In order to have successful DevOps transformation, it needs to touch everyone. Let's look very simply on this. We have established process in our development teams, right? We have CI/CD pipeline. We have proper branching strategy, proper code reviews, the whole process for merging, for testing the artifacts, etc., 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 etc. And of course, from the second perspective, second side of this coin, we have agile process. It can be Scrum, it can be Kanban, it can be anything else where we have proper approach to this. And then someone from top comes to us and say, hey, I need this feature for tomorrow, or hey, some client just said to me that we have a problem, just go to the server and fix this. And we do everything behind the backs of Agile, DevOps, everything. And we are done with DevOps and with Agile. We can just say about this. Very often we can say that DevOps in this area is kind of evolution of Agile. Well, we can argue again about this. But anyway, DevOps includes many areas, starting from development, through QAs, through system engineers, through network engineers, DBAs, to management, really. And the successful culture of DevOps will establish a very, very good collaboration between all of those elements, all of those teams. And the collaboration here is the key word. And again, looking on the Atlassian side, they say that the most successful companies are on board with DevOps culture across every department and at all levels of the org chart. So this is exactly what I said. It's vague in some way. Why it's vague? Because, as I said, there is no like a template to implement. You cannot implement, you cannot buy, you cannot hire culture. You need to build it. And every single person in your organization will change the dynamics of this culture. Honestly speaking, in my opinion, this pillar, the first pillar, is the most important. We very often don't think about this, don't care about this. But without proper culture, people who are doing, let's say, doing DevOps, they are DevOps engineers, let's call it this way. They are just different kind of developer or sysadmin with fancy name DevOps engineer. It's nothing else. The fancy position using buzzword. It's very similar like using Agile in waterfallish way. We still do waterfall, but we do it in Kanban, so that's why we are Agile. So the same here. We have someone who is taking care about CI/CD, so we have DevOps. No, you don't. Simple like that. How we can measure, how we can tell that we have something done properly or not, this is tricky. Okay? Some time ago, I wrote the part of the skill book in DevOps Institute about the measurement of the performance. And this chapter for culture was the most hard, really. Because, again, it's so vague. You don't have code for culture. You don't have repositories for culture. And I came to idea to try to look on this aspect from three perspectives, really. So what builds the culture in our organization from DevOps perspective? We can say continuous improvement on different levels, continuous improvement for the processes, for the development, for people, for our knowledge, for our collaboration, etc., etc., etc. But also employees' happiness and staff productivity. Those aspects here we can take into consideration when we talk about the DevOps culture. What we can measure in this case. And I was thinking a lot about this, and I mean it really a lot. And I came to consideration that we have two aspects to measure. We have like a team perspective and the individual perspective. And generally speaking, we can have these two aspects for all pillars in columns. So, for example, what we can measure from the perspective of the team, even organization. For example, process improvement. For example, team attrition. This is a very important element. If your people are leaving the company, one of the reasons can be this culture. There is no collaboration, blaming culture, etc., 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 right? It's kind of very popular now, kind of buzzword, I would say, no blaming culture. So if the problem exists, we take care about the problem, about the solution. We want to solve the issue. We are not finger pointing to specific people. This is the one aspect. Second aspect, everyone is welcome to say his or her opinion or ask questions or disagree with even some managers. And your voice will be heard. This is another aspect of the culture, which is very important because we want to have this possibility to express our concerns sometimes. And this also leads to something what is very important in culture, in DevOps at all, ownership. I really recommend a book written by two ex-Navy SEALs called Extreme Ownership. So they present the business cases through the perspective of the soldier who was in the real war, and how those two worlds can be connected and what can be, let's say, implemented from one world to another to improve the culture, improve the ownership. Because this is quite simple, really. If you own something and you feel empowered, you will put more effort into it. You will treat it more personally, even. This is very important aspect here. So this is also connected with team attrition, as I said, because if people are leaving, we need to know why, and this aspect can be one of the most important. Not because someone pays more, not because there is more interesting stock somewhere else. I feel bad in this company. I feel bad in this environment. I want to change this. This is maybe a case. There are a couple more, but I don't have that much time. From the individual perspective, what we can measure, for example, team cooperation. And you can say, come on, team and individual, how they are connected. So, well, they are connected in this way that the team is built from the individuals, right? And now the question is if we have group of individuals or team, and how this team performs. There is very nice diagram how team dynamics looks like. Maybe I'll do episode about this somewhere in the future, but not now. Another aspect of the culture, how sharing of the knowledge looks like, how people collaborate with each other. What is the buzz factor and how this buzz factor changed in time? What is buzz factor? Imagine the situation, or differently, think about your team and every single member in your team, and think what will happen if this person will be not able to come to work for 1 week, 1 month, 6 months because of something. Are you able to cover the work of this person? Are your team prepared to cover the work of this person? This is very often the scenario when you have the team and the team contains only one person who is treated as a DevOps. He is a DevOps engineer, right? And he is sick, he left the company, whatever, and the team is like in OG's mode. So those elements are kind of important, and also for the team perspective and the individual perspective, because those metrics can be connected to both worlds, is the ownership. This is what I said. We can use the quote, we take ownership when we believe that taking action is not someone else's responsibility. This is a valid point. We want to be responsible. And this quote is from Warren Tanner article on Medium. The article is called Here's How You Get Employees to Take Ownership Over Their Work. To conclude this episode, because it took longer than I expected, really. Culture is the first pillar of DevOps, of columns in DevOps. I believe most important. What I saw many times is very often forgotten, not used at all, not being in minds of people at all. And without this element, we are not able really to implement proper DevOps processes, because we need to remember, and I mentioned this already, DevOps is not just CI/CD with Ansible and in cloud with Kubernetes. These elements, these technical elements, are the most easy. The easiest, really, in the whole equation. And with that thought, I will leave you for now, and next week we will talk about automation. Have a nice day, take care, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of DevOps in Agile Way podcast with your host, Pavel Pivosh. Subscribe, comment, and do not forget to check our next episodes. Stay tuned. Stay safe. Stay curious.